right, so now we need to take a look and see if there are any more aspects in play here. Seating arrangements can be a huge one. Where a child sits can definitely determine whether or not they succeed or fail that day. Do they need a behavior reward system? Do they need a token system? Do they have goals? Have you pushed their goals? Have you explained their goals to them? Are they motivated? When you explain those goals to those students, they become motivated to meet those goals. When they meet those goals, celebrate them. If they don't meet those goals, make sure that you're talking to them about, okay, we didn't meet the goals this time, but here's how we can meet them next time. Move students into specialized programs. Now, this is once interventions have been exhausted. Once you've put intervention after intervention after intervention into this process and nothing's working, you need to consider ulterior options or other options. They need to either be pulled by a reading specialist, maybe they're taken out for a half hour. Like I said earlier, that my school has a Read 180 program. Sometimes my students transfer them from general ed curriculum into the Read 180 program. And last but not least, they can be considered for an IEP. Definitely at this point in time, obviously you have to involve parents, educate them, make sure they know what's going on, get them on board, be comforting to them. Remember and keep in mind that these are their little babies. This is their whole entire world. So they are going to be concerned about them. They are going to have questions. They're not with them all day. And keep that in mind when you're communicating this with them. They don't know all of this jargon, and they don't know all of these big words, and they're not familiar with it. So just handle them with care. They're a really important part of this. I don't know what interventions are or how to come up with them. This was a big one. I had no idea what interventions were. I was told, oh, put into place some interventions in your classroom for students who are struggling, and I didn't really know what an intervention was at that point in time. Now, of course, I do, so I'm going to share that with you. An intervention is something that an individual or group of students is receiving outside of the regular curriculum that is taught on a daily basis. So they're getting something else that is not taught to the entire class. It is just taught to that small group or to that individual student. Many interventions can be done in small group, which is really, really great. That way you get to see maybe 5 students at once, 5 at the max, I would say. But you're seeing these students and you're able to record and document this intervention all at once. So you're saving yourself a ton of time, plus you're giving these students exactly what they need. This allows you to provide additional support for several students at once while the rest of your class is practicing and reinforcing a skill that they've already been introduced to. Now, this is where my centers come into place into my classroom. When we're working on centers, I have my students doing something that they can do independently. I teach my students how to self-assess and to create goals throughout the entire year. They work a lot on that while I'm working with small group. Of course, I give them some sort of information that they have already seen. It's nothing brand new, but it's something that they can work on at that time that's going to allow them to grow but not become busy work. As long as I have students working on something that they can see their growth, they can see their progress, they can chart it, they can graph it, as long as it's something meaningful like that, I don't mind having them working in small groups without me. I also have my teacher's aide in my room for this point in my day, so she's allowed to walk around. She knows what my centers are. She knows what is expected of my students, and she's amazing. She keeps them on task for me, and it's fantastic. I highly suggest coming up with some sort of RtI centers if you are to do this type of model. All right, I have a real life example here. Now, these are some interventions that I came up with because, again, I said I wasn't sure about this when I first started. So here's an example for you, and here's what I would do in my classroom. Student C has difficulty writing complete, well thought out sentences during writing instruction. C is well behind their peers when it comes to writing, but is a math pro. Benchmarking shows that C is in Tier 2 in reading, but in Tier 1 in math. So C is very clearly a math student, got that math brain going on, but has a really hard time communicating their thoughts into writing. So some interventions that I would apply are student C is provided with a writing template or checklist. I do not like worksheets though, and I'll tell you why. If you have a worksheet for the student that's kind of like a checklist, they kind of glance at it, go over it, yeah, I have that, I have that, I have that. I do like something that is tactile, that is interactive in a sense. Something that they have to physically check off to make sure that they have in their writing is more meaningful than a checklist that they just glance over with their eyes. something that they have to go put a check mark next to. Do I have all my capital letters? Do I have my details? Do I have my proper punctuation? Do I have good word choice? Something that they physically have to move back and forth with is so much more beneficial to them than just a plain old checklist. The second intervention that I could write down, or I could put on their sheet, their data tracking sheet, is that they're provided with prompting questions while writing. Now, 90% of your students are not going to need this. Some of them will be able to sit down and write 2 to 3 paragraphs in this writing time, and C might not be able to write even 1 or 2 sentences. If you're prompting them with who, what, why, where, when, if you're prompting them with those questions and allowing them to think through that process and then to record it in writing, you're providing them with an intervention. Think about that. You're providing one student with something, or a group of students with something that the rest of your class is not receiving. If you're doing that, you are doing an intervention, and you can write that down as long as you are consistent with it. If you aren't consistent with it and you did it for one day and forgot about it for the next 3 weeks, you cannot record that because it's not consistent. It's going to skew your data, and it's not going to help out that child. Student C is to use a writing reminder bracelet that coordinates with sentence structure. We have something like this in place at my school. We use pipe cleaners for it. You put the beads on the pipe cleaners, twist it around their wrist, and it becomes their bracelet. Then you teach them what the beads mean. The purple bead might mean capital letters. The blue bead might mean descriptive detail. And you go on and you maybe give them some sort of anchor chart for that where they can look up and remember, okay, I have my blue bead. That's going to be something kinesthetic. That's something for those students who need something physical in front of them to remember what to do and why they're doing it. If they can touch the purple bead, do I have that one? Then they touch the blue bead, do I have that one? That's going to be meaningful for them. That's going to keep them on target. That's going to alleviate you from having to stand next to them the entire time to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to and they're on task and sticking with the writing prompt. It's really going to save you a lot of time. Again, this doesn't have to be for everyone in your classroom. If you're doing it for one student and not for the whole class, it's an intervention. Write it down, be consistent, put the dates on it, and you're done. When do I have time to do all of this? This is a ton of information that I've just released upon you, and it seems so very overwhelming. And how do I have time? I barely have time to get through reading and math as it is, and I completely understand it. It is difficult. I will say it is difficult, but it is possible. And if you start it and you get a system and you start it from the beginning of the school year and teach your students and train them, it will run so smoothly you don't even have to be in the classroom for it technically. Since you cannot service your Tier 2 and Tier 3 students during normal whole group, small group instruction time, you need to set aside a time in your day to pull these students. Now, in my school, I am allotted 30 minutes for just strictly RtI time. This is when my teacher's aide comes in, she works with a group, I work with a group, I'm pulling students. My students are self-assessing themselves and working independently, and it moves very, very smoothly. If you want more information on how I set up my centers in my classroom, go visit my Google Drive. There's a document that I've listed up there, how every center is run, how I model it in the beginning of the school year, what materials I use, and the different objects that I use in my classroom to help move my students along. I use 5 centers. There's 5 days in a week that allows them to reach all 5 unless I'm pulling them, and they love it. Consider setting aside those 30 minutes, like I said, if your school does not do that. So if you have a reading block and your school's not doing a specific RtI time, take those 30 minutes, designate that as your RtI time to make sure that you yourself stay responsible for this time, because it's so easy to get away from you. It's so easy to lose that time when you've got assemblies or field trips or something going on. Like I said, centers work extremely well in this case. I've linked it all there for you. There will be a link below. All right, more about RtI centers. During these centers, I have my students working independently on activities that they are able to run and self-assess on their own. For example, on Monday, they might start at my Fluency Center. I do have 5 iPods in my classroom that are just repurposed old iPhones that I use. I let them record themselves. I taught them how to make their own running records. They read 1 minute, they listen to themselves, and they mark their own running record, and then they do it again to see their improvement. They love it. They love using the iPods. They love hearing themselves. At first, they hate hearing their voices recorded, I'm sure, as we all do. But after a while, they look forward to that center. My school does put in place what's called an SRA laboratory. It's a reading program. 5 of my students leave every day for that during this time. I have a nonfiction center where I supplement a lot of my social studies and science curriculum and let my students kind of evolve on their own and become interested in all of these nonfiction topics that they normally wouldn't be able to be exposed to during the normal reading block. While they're keeping busy practicing skills and keeping track of their own data, I am seeing small groups during this time. I'm pulling my one-on-one interventions in Tier 3. I'm constantly busy during this time. This is when I service those 2s and 3s. This is when I document it. I make sure that I write it down because it's so easy to forget it. So, and I have even in the past allowed one of my students in each of the groups to be my recorder for the day. So they write down the skill, they write down the objective, they write down who is there and what the date is. I keep them responsible for everything in the classroom. It gives them a sense of ownership. All right, that is it. If you have any questions about RTI or RTI implementation in your classroom, please email me. My email is bethechangeyouwant@gmail.com. I was new to this last year. I'm sorry, the year previous. Oh my gosh, I'm getting old. The year before this one, I was new to this, and I've kind of gotten this system down that has worked so well in my classroom. We were guinea pigs in our district for this system, and we've definitely broken it down into a system that does work well for us. I would love to hear how you guys implement this into your classrooms. Like I said, I've only been familiar with this in my school. I would just love to hear different ideas and different opinions and why you think that way, and to share and collaborate with one another. We will also be having a Google Hangout. I will release more information about that on my Tumblr, as well as the EDU PD page. All right, I hope you enjoy that. Email me if you have any questions.